In a previous video, I talked about US biological warfare testing and how they often involved essentially experimenting on unsuspecting civilians, such as Operation Sea Spray, where they sprayed the air with a bacteria that was supposed to be harmless, but it ended up not being harmless. And they sprayed the air just to see how vulnerable San Francisco and other cities were to airborne biological warfare attacks. And we were the price to pay for that, and our health was the price to pay for that. Today, we're going to be talking about human radiation experiments, and I've got a whole list right here for you. This is all public domain, surface level information. You can find it yourself. This is all confirmed, and it goes far deeper than this, but what you're about to hear is already shocking and awful. Researchers in the United States have performed thousands of human radiation experiments to determine the effects of atomic radiation and radioactive contamination on the human body, generally on people who are poor, sick, or powerless. Most of these tests were performed, funded, or supervised by the United States military, the Atomic Energy Commission, or various other federal government agencies. The experiments included a wide array of studies involving things like feeding radioactive food to mentally disabled kids, or conscientious objectors, inserting radium rods into the noses of school kids, deliberately releasing radioactive chemicals over the United States and Canadian cities, measuring the health effects of radioactive fallout from nuclear bomb tests, injecting pregnant women and babies with radioactive chemicals, and irradiating the testicles of prison inmates, among other things. Yes, this all really happened, and we're just getting started. Much information about these programs was classified and kept secret. In 1986, the United States House Committee on Energy and Commerce released a report entitled American Nuclear Guinea Pigs: 3 Decades of Radiation Experiments on U.S. Citizens. In the 1990s, Eileen Welsum's reports on radiation testing for the Albuquerque Tribune prompted the creation of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments by executive order of President Bill Clinton to monitor government tests. It published results in 1995. Welsum later wrote a book called The Plutonium Files. They go on to specify here the next is radioactive iodine experiments. In 1949, there was an operation called the Green Run, right? And I guess it was the U.S. Atomic Energy Commission. And they released iodine-131 and xenon-133 into the atmosphere near the Hanford site in Washington, which contaminated a 500,000, oh my God, 2,000 square kilometer area containing 3 small towns. Wow. In 1953, the AEC ran several studies at the University of Iowa on the health effects of radioactive iodine in newborns and pregnant women. In one study, researchers gave pregnant women between 100 to 200 microcuries of iodine-131 to study the women's aborted embryos in an attempt to discover at what stage and to what extent radioactive iodine crosses the placental barrier. In another study, they gave 25 newborn babies who were under 36 hours old and weighed from 5.5 to 8.5 pounds iodine-131, either by oral administration or through an injection, so that they could measure the amount of iodine in their thyroid glands, as iodine would go to that gland. This is horrific. In another study, the Atomic Energy Commission, researchers at the University of Nebraska College of Medicine fed iodine-131 to 28 healthy infants through a gastric tube to test the concentration of iodine in the infant's thyroid gland. So they're very interested in this thyroid gland stuff and how it absorbs radiation. In 1953, the Atomic Energy Commission sponsored a study to discover if radioactive iodine affected premature babies differently from full-term babies. In the experiment, researchers from Harper Hospital in Detroit orally administered iodine-131 to 65 premature and full-term infants who weighed from 2.1 to 5.5 pounds. So I will just slip my own commentary in here for just a moment, but we do have to keep in mind that all of this testing, right, was done with, whether it was through the intelligence agencies like CIA with Artichoke and MK Ultra, or if it was the military side of things, you have to use regular hospitals, right? Like the hospital down the street or the major hospital in your city is not just that is not just a normal everyday hospital necessarily, right? I mean, these were the same types of hospitals that were used, right? Where they take a specialized neurosurgeon, one out of the three neurosurgeons that are there in the hospital, throw them on the CIA payroll, throw them on the payroll of whatever military contractor is looking into this, and they use them as front companies. They get paid through front companies, or they participate in studies. So I don't know if they necessarily get paid, but nonetheless, they both benefit, right? And a lot of these programs remain secret, as you just read here, as is stated in this article, that a lot of this stayed classified until like the early 90s, guys, right? A lot of the stuff you don't hear until 50, 60, 70 years out. And that's if you're lucky. That's if you're lucky. So let's continue. Where did we leave off? Oh, yeah, that's right. Feeding iodine 131 to infants. Good. Great. In Alaska, starting in August 1955, the Atomic Energy Commission selected a total of 102 Inuit natives and I can't pronounce that, other tribe of Indians who would be used to study the effects of radioactive iodine on the thyroid tissue. So again, another thyroid study, particularly in cold environments. Yeah, so does heat or does cold play a role in the absorption of radiation in thyroid tissue? Over a 2-year span, the test subjects were given doses of iodine 131 and samples of saliva, urine, blood, and thyroid tissue were collected from them. The purpose and risk of the radioactive iodine dosing, along with the collection of body fluid and tissue samples, was not explained to the test subjects. Holy shit. And the AEC did not conduct any follow-up studies to monitor for long-term health effects. It's disgusting. There was also an experiment in the 1960s where over 100 Alaskan citizens were continuously exposed to radioactive iodine. So they fucked a lot of people up with radioactive iodine, guys, back in those days, right? I mean, think about it. You don't have a Project Manhattan. You don't develop nuclear weapons without knowing the effects of radiation, right? This is how they figured out and determined those effects, okay? And note, all of this study is like far after World War II. I know that's not necessarily the same thing, but we dropped these types of bombs, right, in World War II on 2 cities, right? And we're still researching the effects of radiation 20 years later at this point, is my point. 1960s. That's not the same. Well, whatever. You know, they knew a lot when they created it, but they're knowing, you know, they're learning even more now, you know. As a layman, you would just think that, like, they kind of had all this figured out before they started fucking around with weapons like this, right? So anyway, moving on, there are now uranium experiments, okay? So this took place between 1946 and 1947, at least, you know, these particular uranium experiments. During that year, 46 and 47, researchers at the University of Rochester injected uranium-234 and uranium-235 in dosages ranging from 6.4 to 70.7 micrograms per kilogram of body weight into 6 people to study how much uranium their kidneys could tolerate before becoming damaged. Between 1953 and 1957, at the Massachusetts General Hospital, Dr. William Sweet injected 11 terminally ill, comatose, and semi-comatose patients with uranium in an experiment to determine, among other things, its viability as a chemotherapy treatment against brain tumors, which all but one of the patients had, one being a misdiagnosis. Dr. Sweet, who died in 2001, maintained that consent had been obtained from the patients and next of kin. Okay, so I don't doubt that, right? Some of these experiments that we look at as horrific in some ways, I would not doubt if a terminally ill individual was given, you know, if they were fully cognitive or, you know, awake. Maybe they would do that. Maybe I can. It's the same thing as like being an organ donor, right? I don't need my organs when I die. And these people might say, well, look, it's not looking good for me. I don't have that long. Maybe I'll try and, you know, at least in some way benefit the larger body of science, right? And help further it. That's pretty cool. Now, with the comatose people, that's a moral slippery slope there. That's a little bit of a, because if I was in a coma, okay, I don't know. The idea of like my parents being the ones deciding, yeah, you can inject him with uranium. Yeah, go ahead. Like, I don't like that personally. I don't think that's right. If I can't give consent personally with my own voice, my own way to communicate, I don't want anything done to me. And by the way, look how they word this. Dr. Sweet maintained that he had obtained consent. Okay, but why is that even up for debate? What do you mean? Like, was it not just like, was there no vigorous record keeping about injecting people with uranium? So it's up for debate. Dr. Sweet maintained, aka, oh yeah, no, I definitely got consent. Nah, yeah, I got consent. That's basically what this sentence means. Do we not have like signed signatures? Is there no paper trail? But again, these are uranium experiments. These are nuclear type, atomic energy commission, DARPA military experiments, probably of the utmost secret. So maybe there is a paper trail, but do you think we're going to see it? No. So all we get is Dr. Sweet, who died in 2001, maintained that consent had been obtained. Well, boy, good. You know, we're injecting kids with viral hepatitis, feeding feces, if you saw my last videos, with viral hepatitis or whatever, to mentally disabled kids. But sure, you maintain that consent had been obtained. Now, I'm not saying Dr. Sweet was involved in that type of shit personally. You know what I'm saying? I'm just gonna, it's messed up, man. So then next is plutonium experiments. And this was from 1945 to 1947, but specifically April 10th, 1945 to July 18th, 1947. 18 people were injected with plutonium as part of the Manhattan Project, the big project. Guys, the project that ushered in the age of compartmentalization when it comes to information security, meaning that this is how the system in place now, the one where the CIA can do these secret, fucked up human experimentation projects without Congress overseeing it, right? That used to be sort of how it goes. Congress oversees these programs. There's an approval or a disapproval process. There's a vote or there's something. Either way, it's all above board, in other words. It wasn't until the Manhattan Project came around, guys, that the CIA really became known to be what they are today, because they can't do what they do today, as well as other military outfits too. They can't do what they do today if it weren't for the idea that the information is compartmentalized. And I always give this example, but it's so important because everyone, critics especially, will always say, how can something like this be perpetrated? It would require too many people and someone would have to talk, right? And it's like, no, that's not the case. You could watch my video on compartmentalization, but the idea is basically just like, you take a missile. Let's pretend the US is building a top secret, top tier, exotic, brand new missile, right? We got to keep secret, right? Well, the scientists working on it aren't told they're working on a missile. All they're told to do is screw the bolts into this place, apply the metal sheaths, in this way on this part. They don't know they're building a rocket or a missile. So all of this information is extremely compartmentalized. So even if you were captured by an enemy country, it says, tell me all you know. I know you're working on a top secret missile. They'd be like, what the fuck? No, I don't. I really, under torture, they couldn't say, because there is no information to have, because the need to know, the advent of the need to know based system of compartmentalization came about with the Manhattan Project. And look what ushered it in. Look what came with the Manhattan Project. 18 people being injected with plutonium, right? Doses administered ranged from 95 to 5,900 nanocuries. Then it goes on about Albert Stevens. Albert Stevens, a man misdiagnosed with stomach cancer, received treatment for his cancer at the UC San Francisco Medical Center in 1945. Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, a Manhattan Project doctor in charge of the human experiments in California, had Stevens injected with PU-238 and PU-239 without informed consent. Without informed consent. Okay? So this guy, a Manhattan Project doctor, Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, in furtherance of the Manhattan Project and its body of knowledge, he was willing to do that to somebody without their informed consent. So whatever they were doing was just so good. Like, Stevens never had cancer, though, believe it or not. A surgery to remove cancerous cells was highly successful in removing the benign tumor, and he lived for another 20 years with the injected plutonium, so I guess that's good, right? Since Stevens received, I guess it depends how old he was when he went in. Since Stevens received the highly radioactive PU-238, his accumulated dose over his remaining life was higher than anyone has ever received. That's insane. Neither Albert Stevens nor any of his relatives were told that he had never had cancer. They were led to believe that the experimental treatment had worked. Oh my God, dude. So this poor guy was fooled. He was injected with a highly radioactive substance that could have killed him, and it would have been written off as cancer. But not only that, he never had cancer like he was told. And then not only that, when they told him he doesn't have cancer anymore, he was never told that he was... And instead, the very treatment, the very thing he was called that they called a treatment was actually plutonium. So he's sitting there celebrating those nice young men. My doctor, Dr. Joseph Gilbert Hamilton, he saved my life. His novel treatment worked. No, it didn't. You never had cancer, and we injected you with plutonium. Fucking wild, man. His cremated remains were surreptitiously acquired by Argonne National Laboratory Center for Human Radiobiology in 1975. Oh my God, this gets worse. After he died, remember, he lived 20 years. 20 years after being injected. After he died, he was cremated, okay? Just a normal burial. His cremated remains were acquired. How do you acquire cremated remains? By Argonne National Laboratory Center for Human Radiobiology in 1975 without the consent of surviving relatives. Some of the ashes were transferred to the National Human Radiobiology Tissue Repository at Washington State University, which keeps the remains of people who died with radioisotopes in their body, probably to monitor the rate in which it breaks down. Jeez, man. Okay, so this is my question. You cremate someone, right? For people that have gone through that, maybe it's a loved one, maybe it's a friend, right? And it's in a jar. Where do you put that? Like, people will often have a little shrine for grandpa, mima, peepaw, you know what I mean? Or whatever you choose to do with it, your own personal ritual. Are you saying that the Argonne National Laboratory broke into a home or something and acquired that? How do you acquire cremated remains covertly without the consent of surviving relatives? Well, someone had to collect it, so they didn't spread it over a field, right? And he just went digging it up. That doesn't make sense. It must have been in a jar. Where did they keep that jar? A mother, a father, uncle, aunt, a brother, a sister, a daughter, a son must have had the remains. Did the Argonne National Laboratory... You get what I'm saying? They call it surreptitiously acquired. His cremated remains were surreptitiously acquired by Argonne National Lab. What does that mean? Is that... I feel like that's a euphemism for a ski mask, a crowbar, and gloves entering a residential home to get these cremated remains. Maybe a sample. Either way, I hope you guys understand and are following me right now. Anyway, let's continue. 3 patients at Billings Hospital at the University of Chicago were injected with plutonium. This was in 1946. In 1946, 6 employees of a Chicago metallurgical lab were given water that was contaminated with plutonium-239. And what was that for? Well, that was so researchers could study how plutonium is absorbed into the digestive tract. Dude, you're no better. You're a hunk of meat to me. I'm going to give you a glass of radioactive water so I can track how it fucks up your GI tract. These are that type. These are demons. You know, this is demonic. So remember, all that progress you like talking about, this dope-ass technological innovation, don't get me wrong, we've made amazing advances in the field of, different, in science, especially in this medical side, medical sciences. But make no mistake, man, at the same time, where do you think a lot of this understanding comes from? As you can see, the one guy was dosing mentally disabled children with hepatitis, viral hepatitis. But what was he doing it for? He was doing it in the name of creating a vaccine against it. So these children are, in a way, offered in exchange for the millions of children he will one day save. That could be the argument, right? But you're never told that. There's no vote. You just go to the wrong hospital on the wrong day, and more specifically, get the wrong doctor that is also taking part in a covert special access program with no congressional oversight, and fill in the blank. Hey, instead of diazepam for the pain, we're going to give you something else today. Or, like in the MK Ultra experiments, people would go in for sleep studies. They would see an ad in the paper for a sleep study. Come in and sleep for 12 hours and you'll get $50. We just have to monitor how people's brains do X, Y, and Z while they sleep. Nope. When they left that place, they couldn't piss or shit right anymore because they depatterned them. You know what I'm saying? They did that. They got caught up in part of those patterning experiments. That's how it works, guys. That's how this works. So if you enjoyed this presentation or the information, if you thought it was of value in any way, please consider supporting the show. Follow me on the platforms below. You can also throw me a tip over here. Cash App, Venmo, PayPal, help your boy out, keeps the show running. But most importantly, share this video to your friends, to your family, people that are interested, people that are critical, that would help me out a lot. Specifically, I'm now on YouTube at MemoryHold 5.0. Follow me there. We're doing good on Rockfin, guys. 2,100 folks over there. Thank you for your support. And yeah, we're just going to keep at it, guys. I just appreciate you sticking with me. I'll see you later.